Good morning and welcome. Please silence any cell phones or electronic equipment. Our program is about to begin.
My worst distraction, my rhythm and blues. I can't stop singing, it's ringing in my head for you.
They say we live in a world of fake news. I disagree. We actually live in a world of fake olds. Think about it. We see the same old story over and over in the media. You know the stories. They tell us the world is becoming worse off every day. They say that new conflicts are rising in each and every way, but if we were to step back and examine the facts, we will come to one conclusion: that our world in which we live in is actually improving.
Despite all the very real problems that confront us today, I still see grounds for optimism.
Everyone benefits from digital services.
And prosperity is nothing less than the seedbed for peace.
Thanks to trade and globalization, we have made huge progress in areas like poverty, infant mortality, hunger, crime, education, and disease reduction. And see, the smiles of millions of people around the globe are the proof. Now, that's not to say we don't have a long way to go, but can we please tell the truth? It is said that in a time of universal deceit, telling the truth is a revolutionary act. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I am standing here in front of you to do just that. And I do not mean to offend anyone in the room, but the strongest nation in the world is not the USA. It's not Russia. It's not found anywhere in Asia. The strongest nation has always been and will always be imagination. See, if we can imagine a better world together, based not on our differences, but on the things that connect us and make us whole, then we can create a future that is much greater than any vision we could ever have alone. I emphasize the word together because, as the African proverb states, if you want to go fast, go alone. But if you want to go far, you go together. You know, I learned something about the Belgian horse the other day. Did you know that one Belgian horse can pull 8,000 pounds by himself? But get this, two of them can pull 18,000 pounds. And if you send them to training, really focus them on this singular endeavor, then they can pull 25,000 pounds together. Together, we can pull so much more. You know, as a student of history, I study the decisive moments of mankind, the pivot points. There have been many pivotal points throughout history where we found ourselves at a crossroads, given the choice of going one way or another. Ladies and gentlemen, this world is at a pivot point. And we as individuals can continue business as usual, or together we can develop a rather unusual business. A business based on courage, character, and clarity. A business whose goals are free trade, peace, and prosperity. A business that does not focus on isolationism, but answers the global call. A business that builds bridges instead of walls. See, the truth is, there is no first or third world. There's one world. In the universe, uni meaning one, verse meaning song, we all have a part to play in this song. Some of us will pick to play first chair. Those who can lift the world up in ways that no one else can. That's you. See, we have many instruments in this ensemble, from violins to cellos to flutes to French horns. And when they solo, they all sound very clever. But ladies and gentlemen, An orchestra only happens when the instruments play together. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the founder of Bloomberg LP and Bloomberg Philanthropies, Michael R. Bloomberg.
Hello.
Thank you. Good stuff. That was it.
Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Global Business Forum. We have an extraordinary group of government and business leaders from around the world, and I would like to have a special thanks to the international partners who helped bring it all together. Their names are listed on the screens around you. Now, I couldn't agree more with the narrator of that opening video, Prince EA, and especially the story that he told about the Belgian horses. We can accomplish so much more working together than apart, and there is no other week of the year when we have a better opportunity to do that than the UN General Assembly Week. UNGA Week brings world leaders together in one place to promote peace and tackle common challenges, and I'm honored to support that work as the Secretary General's Special Envoy for Climate Action. But the private sector also has an important role to play in many of the challenges that world leaders are here in New York to address. This forum is designed to give business leaders a seat at the table, including on an issue where the UN doesn't have much formal role, and that is trade. And I want to thank all of you for making this event a priority during what I know is a very busy week for all of you. This forum grew out of a conference that Bloomberg Philanthropies hosted a few years ago with the Obama administration called the U.S. African Business Forum. That forum, like this one, included heads of states and leaders of major businesses, and it was so successful at spurring talk on trade and investment that we decided to make it a global event. And we're glad to have heads of state from 6 continents here today. And from my experience, government leaders want to engage in these kinds of discussions with CEOs more often than they get a chance to. The King of Jordan once reminded me of something that I told him. Countries with Bloomberg offices almost never go to war. I believe the reason is business is intertwined with these countries and gives them an incentive to work together. Now, Bloomberg didn't at that point have an office in Jordan, so maybe the king was just angling for our business, but it worked because we then opened an office there. And behold, no war. Trade has made the world more peaceful and stable by connecting our nations and aligning our interests. But the benefits of trade have not been distributed as widely as we think they should be, and we must do more to address that. The challenge facing all nations is, how do we promote economic growth that is inclusive, sustainable, and fair, and that addresses people's real fears about the future? As you will hear a little later from my friend Tom Friedman, the New York Times columnist, say, quote, "The best way to manage the ups and downs of trade is to strengthen your floors, not raise your walls or build ceilings." Now, I think he's absolutely right, and today's a chance to begin putting some of those floorboards down, because building floors requires leadership from both the public and private sectors. By working together, we can do more to reduce poverty and improve public health. We can do more to protect the environment and promote equal opportunity for women. We can do more to connect people with new skills to succeed in an economy that is being transformed by new technology. Later today, directly following the conclusion of the Global Business Forum, the One Planet Summit will take place right here in this room. This summit was created by President Emmanuel Macron of France as a way to accelerate our progress on climate change. Bloomberg Philanthropies has been glad to work with his team to bring it together, along with the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres and World Bank President Jim Kim. So this is a day full of potential, Our success won't be measured at the end of it. It will be measured in the months and years to come, and I'm very optimistic about what that future holds if we work together and seize the opportunities before us. Now let me introduce our first speaker of the day, who we are so excited to have with us. She is guiding the UK through a critical moment in its history as it negotiates its relationship with the European Union, and she also has to deal with a contentious domestic political situation. It is an extremely tough job with many difficult questions to work through on the economy, security, immigration, and more. And the answers to those questions will have far-reaching implications, not just for the UK and Europe, but for the whole world. The UK, as you know, is one of the global economy's largest engines and a key partner to countries around the world, and really, in some senses, the father of America. Our company just made a major investment in the future by constructing what we think is a game-changing European headquarters. And I know it's a crucial market for many others in this room. I think her being here is a reflection of the focus that she is putting on building strong economic alliances in two countries around the world, and at a time when there are isolationist pressures on both sides of the Atlantic. So we really are fortunate to have this next speaker here today to share her thoughts on what's ahead, and I want to thank her for making time in her schedule to participate. Please welcome Prime Minister Theresa May.
This week, political leaders have come to New York to discuss how we can work together to ensure the future prosperity and security of our people. And it's right that many of these discussions are taking place at the United Nations. But it is also right that I have come here to this Bloomberg forum because we will only succeed if we also work in partnership with you, some of the most pioneering business leaders in the world today. It's businesses like yours which have been great engines of job creation and growth in my country, here in America, and right around the world. And it is the embrace of open economies and free trade as drivers of innovation and growth that has underpinned your success and acted as the greatest agent of collective human progress. Where free markets have been properly regulated and trade and investment unleashed, we have seen unprecedented levels of wealth and opportunity, rising life expectancy, greater access to education, falling infant mortality, and reductions in absolute poverty on a scale which would once have been hard to imagine. And as governments, we have played our part in helping to make this possible by agreeing and abiding by a global framework of rules and by opening up our economies to competition. But today, new challenges, including the rapid pace and breadth of technological change, are causing some to question their faith in the institutions of global cooperation and the framework of rules which has brought us to this point. They look at who gains from free trade and ask whether this global economic system is fair and whether it can really be made to work for everyone. They look at the growth of artificial intelligence and ask whether their children and grandchildren will have the skills to succeed in the new economy. And they look at some of the tensions in global trade today and ask whether the rules-based system can be really adapted to reflect the realities of the modern world. My answer to all of these questions is a bold and optimistic yes. And my message today is that a post-Brexit Britain will be an unequivocally pro-business Britain and a global partner that will help to lead the international response to those challenges. Through our modern industrial strategy at home, we will create one of the most dynamic and business-friendly economies in the world, driving investment opportunities for your businesses and spreading the benefits of new sectors and technologies to every part of my country. And internationally, as a global Britain, we will champion our vision for the future of the global economy, a vision that is based on openness, innovation, competition, high quality, and intelligent regulation. And we will be at the forefront of sustained international efforts to address the challenges facing global trade, and to build a dynamic and competitive global economy that can truly work for everyone. I've always been clear what the United Kingdom stands for and what we want to achieve as we leave the European Union. Our relationship with the EU will change with Brexit, but we will still be neighbours, we will still be part of the European family of nations, and we will continue to champion the same beliefs, standing for freedom, democracy, and the rule of law, underpinned by a rules-based global order. And that's why I'm confident we can reach a deal about our future relationship that is built in this spirit. We've put forward a plan for a new but still close relationship with frictionless trade at its heart. There's no other plan that protects jobs and livelihoods and also meets our commitments in Northern Ireland, while respecting how people voted in the largest democratic exercise in our history. And I believe that behind the noise of the headlines and the chattering of the commentators, there is much common ground in these objectives. We know that the other models on offer would not deliver for business, who would face either increased bureaucracy, additional border checks, or both. And so I've urged the EU to engage with our proposals so that we can move forward. To be clear, we're not seeking partial membership of the single market or in any way trying to undermine it, but we are looking to achieve the frictionless trade that I believe is in all of our interests. There's clearly a lot further to go in the negotiations, and the coming weeks will be critical. For the prize is great. With the conclusion of the negotiations over the coming weeks, the certainty of an implementation period in which to adapt to the new arrangements, and the guarantee of frictionless trade with the EU in the future, businesses can look forward to the post-Brexit world with confidence. At the same time, looking beyond the EU, we are absolutely committed to delivering continuity in terms of relationships with existing bilateral partners. And we want to forge the most dynamic and ambitious free trade agreements with old friends and new allies alike. Crucially, we also have a plan to deliver an economy that is knowledge-rich, highly innovative, highly skilled, and high quality, but with low tax and smart regulation. So let me say this very clearly. Whatever your business investing in a post-Brexit Britain, whatever your business investing in a post-Brexit Britain will give you the lowest rate of corporation tax in the G20. You will access service industries and a financial centre in London that are the envy of the world, some of the best universities in the world, strong institutions, a sound approach to public finance, and a consistent and dependable approach to high standards but intelligent regulation. And yes, locating in the UK, you will also be able to access the talent you need. Freedom of movement will end when we leave the European Union, but we will put in place a new immigration system that will allow businesses and universities to attract the brightest and best to the UK. Furthermore, through our modern industrial strategy, we are bending the power of the state and the ingenuity of the private sector to solve 4 grand challenges of the future, which are enormous areas of potential for growth, jobs and investment across our whole country. These are the challenges of clean growth, our ageing society, the future of mobility, and the challenge of artificial intelligence and data, where we've already seen more investment in the UK over the last 3 years than in the rest of Europe combined. We're contributing the UK's biggest ever increase in public investment in research and development, which will help develop new technologies in these 4 areas. And we have set a goal of total public and private investment in research and development reaching 2.4% of GDP by 2027. We will educate and train our young people for the opportunities that meeting these 4 grand challenges will bring. And we will ensure that we have smart, agile regulation and dynamic institutions which promote innovation, but also protect people's rights. Just as we're doing, for example, with AI, where our Centre for Data Ethics and Innovation will make us a global leader in helping to ensure the safe, ethical, and innovative development of this new life-changing technology. At its heart, our modern industrial strategy is about creating a different kind of economy for the future. It's not about seeing business and society as separate entities, where business generates a surplus, government then invests it to handle the social consequences of economic change. But instead, it's about harnessing the enormous power of business as a partner in tackling some of the greatest social challenges of our time. It's not about telling business what to do, but instead genuinely listening to business and working in partnership with you. It's about understanding what you need and working together to shape our economy in a way that will help us make the UK one of the most attractive countries in the world in which to establish and grow a successful business. Just as we work with you to create the best possible environment in which to invest in the UK, so I'm also determined that a post-Brexit Britain will be a trusted partner at the forefront of efforts to address the real challenges facing the future of the global economy. This means playing a leading role in tackling the root causes of the current tensions in global trade, where the rules have not kept pace with the modern world. If a global system is going to function properly, the participants in that system need to believe that the rules and the commitments they make to one another are fundamentally fair. They need to believe that others are playing by both the spirit and the letter of those rules, whether that be in terms of declaring what subsidies are provided or respecting intellectual property rights. They need to believe that any disputes will be dealt with fairly and efficiently. And the rules themselves need to remain relevant by keeping pace with the changing nature of trade and technology. So we need to give the WTO a broad, ambitious, and urgent mandate to reform, to address the areas where it's not functioning effectively, to deal with issues that are not currently covered, and to maintain trust in the system. For example, we need to see new rules in areas such as digital trade and services, including e-commerce, that can boost growth across these dynamic sectors. We need WTO reforms to increase fairness for all participating countries and to enhance global legitimacy and public support for the multilateral trading system, including through greater transparency. We support the EU's efforts in this area, and as we leave the EU, we will want to work with them and all our partners around the world to push this forward and deliver a mandate for change. As a global and independent trading nation, we will use all the means available to us, including our positions in the G7, G20, OECD, IMF, and FSB, to pursue this agenda in partnership with others committed to the same end. And crucially, we also want to make business central to the conversation, because at the end of the day, governments set the framework, but it is businesses that create wealth and drive innovation. These challenges facing the global economy are serious, but a global Britain will be a fully engaged and ambitious partner at the forefront of international efforts to drive reform. And I look forward to hearing from you this morning and to discussing with you what more we can do so that together we can shape the future of the global rules-based system to work for the modern world. And together, we can harness the global power of open economies and free markets to deliver prosperity and opportunity for all, now and for generations to come. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, now in conversation with Prime Minister May, please welcome Chair, President, and Chief Executive Officer of IBM, Ginny Rometty.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. So it's my pleasure to see you again. And I think I speak for everyone in the room from business. Your comments just now, they were optimistic. They talked about partnership. They talked about ease of doing business, they were inclusive, and they were very forward-looking. So I know that's welcome music to everyone's ears. So we're going to have a dialogue, but I thought I'll start it off, if you don't mind, by asking you a question. I wanted to ask my first question to you to say, put yourself in my shoes, or our shoes in business. And although I never let media ask a two-point question, I have a two-sided question here. On one hand, you talked about a really bright future. And so I'd like you to take one more level down and talk about the opportunity. We always talk about the downside. So talk about the opportunity. I'm one of your largest employers, as are many in the room, about what would even be better. We always viewed it was good to do business in Britain. So what would make it, in your view, how our businesses will improve? My other side of my coin is that all of us are in the business of enterprise risk management. And so as we talk about Brexit and obviously your checkers plan, and there between a lot of continuums between there and a hard Brexit, if you were us, and I know all my banking friends, every regulator does its job and says, plan for the worst, right? As all regulators do. So what would you tell us, and what would you do in our shoes to be planning right now? So the future ahead, and then what would you do now to balance that risk?
Well, perhaps if I could take them in the reverse order.
Okay.
And start off with the sort of planning now. Because obviously we're at the point in the negotiations where we've got a few weeks to go. The deadline that was set was always this autumn of this year. And of course, we leave on the 29th of March next year. So, and we don't know where the negotiations will end. I'm confident that we will get a deal. And interestingly, there are more voices around Europe, other European leaders now saying that, talking about getting a deal. But we have to make sure that we're prepared for any eventuality. And of course, as government, we're preparing for a deal and we're preparing for no deal. And my job as government, I think, is to ensure that we have that we've put in place the steps that make sure that if it is that worst case scenario, actually we will still make a success of it. Because I want to make a success of Brexit, whatever the deal. I believe we will get a good deal, but we're taking that contingency planning. But there is, I think, a really bright future there, and it's a number of things that come together. And I think the UK is, in a sense, uniquely placed because some of the advantages that we have, I mentioned some of them in my speech. I think that we have some of the great scientists, innovators, creative minds in the UK. I think we have a sort of ecosystem in the UK that supports business in all aspects. So the financial ecosystem, but also other professional services and others. And we have some of the best universities in the world. And I think working with a government that is interested in ensuring we develop the economy of the future, working with us, bringing together those advantages, I think means that we can really drive forward. And I want the UK to be, as I just said, one of the best places to actually be able to set up and grow a business, and for existing businesses to grow even further, and to work with us as we develop our response to these grand challenges for the future. We want to be a leader in these key issues that are facing the world.
When you mentioned, you spoke a lot about technology and what the future looked like. And as you prepare one way or the other, I know as I think of running a business, and every company today is a technology business, and I think of every country I'm in, what do I need for innovation? And I know three things I'd reinforce, no matter what direction, that I think are important to business. One is going to be the free movement of skills. And you referenced that in your particularly high-valued skills across the country, across the continent, is one. The other thing I know it's going to be imperative is so much of the discussion about trade is about hard goods, physical things, but you referenced this, so much is about digital now. And so they really do need to modernize trade agreements for the digital world. I think actually the agreement with Mexico has some very strong digital trade provisions, something to look at. And that's an important piece, I think, to business, because if that isn't there, this idea that you would have free flow of not just people, data, because all of us, I think many people don't realize, you wake up in the morning, you check the weather. Data had to move across boundaries for that to happen. The next thing you do, you're checking, you go to a bank, you take money out. Data moved around. And so it is, everything in your daily life requires on that. I think so it's very personal to people. It sounds like a threatening trade issue. until you go through everything you do in your life that you just realize for that to happen meant data had to cross a border. So the free flow move of data, I think, is one of the things that is just so important as you now, no matter what the outcome, that and the free movement of skills.
Well, I think on the skills side, there's two things I would say. Yes, of course, when we leave the EU, free movement from the EU will end, but we'll set new immigration rules. But in doing that, we're respecting the vote that took place. That issue of free movement was a key issue in the referendum vote, but also do it in a way that recognises the needs of the British economy. And I think that's important for the future. But there's another element of skills too, which is about skilling our own people, making sure that young people coming through education today in the UK are being equipped for the skills of the future. That's why we're developing our new technical education qualifications, a real emphasis on making sure that every young person can develop their talents, whether that involves going to university, doing an apprenticeship, a technical qualification, making sure we've got those skills. And also, we're starting to introduce retraining for people who are in the workplace already. Because what a lot of people worry about when people talk about AI and such forth is, oh, that means some robot's going to do my job. My job's going to disappear. Actually, there will be jobs, but there'll be different jobs.
Yes.
Retraining people for those jobs is an important element.
Yes.
And then the question of data and so forth, it is right. When people look at trade, they still often tend to look at goods. But actually, we need to be ensuring that we're freeing up the global system in global services, in investment, in procurement, so that all of those issues, which are so important for business and for governments, for economies, are actually part of that free trade movement as well.
Yes, well, let's. You and I have had the chance to talk about skills and about trust and technology many times before, but I want to kind of put two things together you just said. You talked about partnership a lot. I believe this skill issue is one that's the responsibility of business and government together. Neither can solve it alone. And your comment about is trade good or bad? That's a discussion everywhere in the world. And a lot of that roots in whether people think they're going to lose their job because of free trade. On the other side, technology you just referenced. All the fear about, well, does this just displace me and there's no better future? And all that comes back to, I always say to people, it's not really relevant what percentage of jobs will be really eliminated. 100% are going to change. So we've got to make it inclusive so everyone, you mentioned apprenticeships, can participate in this. And that will only be tackled in the time frame that's going to be needed if government and business work together. And so I'm really happy to hear you describe, I think, this continuum. We can help be sure that everyone doesn't have a university degree, and we're working on programs. You and I were talking about, we called it new collar, not a blue collar workforce, not a white collar, a way to participate fully in the economy without having a university degree. But then you mentioned reskilling and apprenticeships, which I think is the more difficult piece that's got to be addressed right now to make this an inclusive. And so I'm really pleased, Prime Minister, that you recognize and put that at the top of your agenda, because it is part of what I know you do every day is to convince the country free trade is good. So maybe a comment about, and I think part of that is that skills agenda to convince people this is a good thing.
I think that's right. It's one of the challenges that we and other governments around the world face today is that I think for some people they feel they've in a sense been left behind.
Yes.
Globalization, free trade, these are things that benefit other people and not them. Making sure actually that people benefit, which they do from free trade, but recognize what it brings, that it brings prosperity, it brings jobs, it brings those opportunities for people for the future. Now that's partly about government, but it is about working with business. It's about working with business to ensure that we're skilling. Obviously, we've talked about what IBM particularly has been doing in relation to skills. Others also are looking at how they can work to help young people particularly get the skills for the future. But it's also about government setting the right environment in which business can thrive. That's about issues like tax and regulation, but it's about working with business as we are in our industrial strategy, in our £1 billion industrial strategy challenge fund with our sector deals, such as our AI sector deal, are about working with business and saying, how can we ensure we're creating the right environment that then enables business to do what it does, which is grow, create jobs, provide prosperity.
Yes, so the world you describe, and I wholeheartedly believe in, is one about inclusive skills for everyone to participate. But you also mentioned, really, we're ushering in a whole new era of technologies, and people have to trust them. This has been a topic near and dear. We met at Davos on this, that it's what was behind you setting up the Center for Ethics that we too have participated with you on. I think everyone would be interested in why this became such at the top of your agenda and your views on that first, and I'll add my own, because I think this is actually the paramount issue, that if people do not trust these new technologies, they will not flourish, by the way, and it will create an even greater have and have-not society. So if you would.
Yes, well, I think this is absolutely right. The economy of the future, technology is here already, but developing rapidly, and the economy of the future depends on people having access to technology, being able to having skills to use technology, being able to take on those jobs, but in their day-to-day life, trusting that technology. And that's why we set up the Centre for Ethics and Data and Innovation. And this is putting these together to make sure that as we see new innovations, as we see developments taking place, we're able to set that ethical framework so people have the confidence of knowing that they don't have to worry about how their data is going to be used. I think we can help people in another way as well, because I think if people see some of this new technology being used to real advantage in their day-to-day lives in ways that perhaps they hadn't thought of, this is also important. If I can give one example, one of our challenges on AI is about how it can actually be used to help to get much earlier diagnosis of some key diseases and health problems that people have. Some really interesting work being done with DeepMinds and Moorfield Hospital on actually using AI to be able to much earlier diagnosis of eye problems, for example, and eye diseases. That can be of real benefit to people. And then if we can show people that this isn't some worrying thing, some scary thing out there that's just going to take your job away, actually it's going to change your life for the better. And, by the way, provide new higher paid, higher skilled jobs that you and your children can take on, then I think we will have, we'll be able to persuade people of the benefits.
I do think it's two sides that have to be addressed. You use the word framework first. I happen to believe, actually all of us should self-regulate ourselves, if at all possible. And when it comes to people trusting technology, privacy, that was one of the things that this center addresses. I think these are paramount issues, trust and transparency, that people believe, as you just said, live by a set of principles. And in fact, actually, I think the world, it will separate between companies that embrace good tech principles and bad tech principles. Good tech principles will be companies, countries that say to this technology, hey, the purpose is to make your and my life better, augment what we do. And I know I speak for somebody who builds some of this, that I have control over that. The other thing is, when it comes to data privacy, to honor that, and that the owner of the data gets the value, right? And then, to your comment a second ago, we too do a lot of work on healthcare, that these technologies be explainable. So in other words, not a black box that says, here's what your illness is. You have to say, why is this the case? Or people won't trust it. And my biggest fear is fairness and bias, because so much of this world of data is trained on history. Well, history's got some bad things in it. And so you've got to be able to check that you're not training bias into everything we do. So I like your word, a framework on how to go about this. And then there is the practical applications that people have to experience every day. And that would help unleash. So I think your work to advance this is really, really critical to drive this, what you view as a whole innovation umbrella for the country. And so you named 4 technologies, and you have great universities there as well. And so I think the issue is going to be now getting these, and I think this is, again, where business can be in partnership with you. So what would you ask of us on how to be stronger partners? Because I think many of us would say what we listen to is intelligent regulation, check. Free trade, check. Modernization of trade, check. Right skills, check. Skills, check. I mean, we would go through that list. What are the areas we can help the most in? I know skills is at the top, but what else can we help in?
Well, I think it's across all of those areas, really. And the first thing is for business and government to recognize the importance of that partnership. I think sometimes in the past it's been much more sort of a separation in terms of business and government, actually recognising that there are roles, that the role that government can play, but also that it's by working together, by exchanging information and understanding that we can really get to the right answers. And that's where things like our sector deals are doing exactly that, bringing business and government together. So partly it's there's certainly on the skills agenda. It's about, and business can help by working with government on what are actually the skills of the future.
Yes.
You know, if you're looking, if a government is looking in our education system, we need to know not just what the skills are needed today, but what they will be needed in the future, such that we can ensure that that is going through the system and young people are being trained up for that.
Yes.
And just also working together to promote the message about free trade and open markets, open economies is so important, so that people see that this is something that is genuine benefit across the world. And we focus naturally on our own countries and the benefit it brings there. But think of the huge benefits that are being brought and can be brought elsewhere in the world. I was in Africa recently, and fascinating, seeing a real enthusiasm. 18 million jobs needing to be created every year between now and I think it's 2035.
Yes.
It's business that's going to create those.
Yes.
Well, that's important. It's business that will create those jobs.
I speak for everyone. I always think, often in a country, someone says, I love jobs. I'm like, you do realize we're the job creators, right? And so I'm going to end with one question from the audience, which I talked to Steve earlier today, and I thought he and I were speaking about really the importance of such a positive environment here. And so, Steve, I'm going to throw to you for the Prime Minister a question here as we wrap up.
I don't know why I got this privilege.
Oh, it's
just in terms of downside management, which is what Ginny was talking about. We actually just bought a big thing in the UK last week, so I guess we're believers. But on the other side, things could really go off with a bad Brexit. And ultimately sort of a change of government. And the things that we really worry about is how bad could things get? I know how good they can get. The good thing, we believe in the good thing, but just in terms of thinking through that from a risk management perspective, it's a little daunting for those of us on the outside. We're not in your system. We just observe. How do you think about that?
Well, I absolutely appreciate and understand the point you're making about as people are making decisions and looking ahead to what the future holds. And at the moment, there is that uncertainty about what the future will hold in terms of Brexit. I think the way I look at it in government is, first of all, just if I can say this again, I believe that we will and can get a deal and a good deal. And that's because it's not actually just about the UK, it's about what's good for the EU as well. And I think that continued trading relationship is going to be a good for both sides. But there are several weeks of intense work to be done in order to get to that point. But from the government's point of view in the UK, we continue to have the same ambitions about the future of our economy. And that's why, in a sense, if you look at what we're doing on the industrial strategy, I think it would have been right to do it anyway, but Brexit brings a sharper focus to it. Because it has, in a sense, we are doing that job of actually saying regardless of what our relationship with the EU is going to be in the future, what is it about our economy that we want to put in place to ensure that people will want to come and invest and will want to create those jobs? And that's why we've been looking at this, this concept of the economy of the future, skilling our young people to make sure that we're having those building blocks in place. That means post-Brexit, whatever that relationship is with the EU, we will be able to ensure that we are still a great country to come and do business, to come and grow a business and create jobs and prosperity. So we're doing our planning for that.
Well, Prime Minister, I want to end. You actually said something I think is really critical to end on a very, I think, optimistic note. in that what you just described, and I think it's a wonderful point about crises, they do sharpen everything about what you do. And so what I heard you describe up there was an extremely positive, forward-looking message to business, in now that you have defined what are very differentiating characteristics, and that I think most of us in this room want to see those all come to pass, not only for our past investments, our future investments. And so, as someone once said to me, everything in politics is impossible till it's not. And so I think that's that you defined it.
Some of the key elements of the UK that make it a great place to invest in and do business aren't going to change post-Brexit. We're still going to have those great scientists, those innovators, that great ecosystem of professional services and financial services. We're still going to have some of the best universities in the world, a great legal system. But some of the positives that bring people to invest in the UK will still be there, regardless of the Brexit.
Well, on behalf of everyone, thank you for so clearly defining what that looks like in the positive side, and as you said, and now articulating it for every constituency, how they can see such a bright future in Britain. So thank you for having this dialogue with me. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Ginny.
Prime Minister.
Thank you.
Prime Minister Jim Hackett from...
Hello, everyone, and thank you, Prime Minister and Ms. Rometty, for a pretty stimulating and interesting conversation. My name is Francine Lacqua. I'm one of the anchors on Bloomberg TV, and it is my great pleasure not only to be here, but also to welcome on stage Mr. Jim Hackett. He's the President and Chief Executive of Ford. Mr. Hackett, please join me on stage. Thank you so much. Mr. Hackett, you have such a global company. You have a supply chain all over the world. It can't be easy when we talk about trade tensions for you.
No, and I'm welcome. I'm really appreciative to be here. I wanted to say hello to the Prime Minister. I thought she did a great job. I got to visit with her last May. And, you know, I've been in the CEO role at Ford for about 16 months, but I ran another company for 20 years, another global company, Steelcase. And in that time, you know, low interest rates, we had the advantage of that. We had the advantage of emerging technologies. We didn't have inflation. And I never thought about trade. It was really a second or third level issue.
How much do you think about trade now?
Well, it's top of mind, and the issue is that it needs to be updated for all the reasons that prompt the discussion. But the key in the negotiation strategies is to find the equilibrium. So business, you hear them talk about they count on certainty. Equilibrium, I think, is a better term, which is you can invest based on the back and forth. In this case, we're kind of frozen. A lot of businesses aren't sure, and that's not good.
How do you stay relevant as a car company? We talked about climate change. We'll talk about climate change. We'll talk a little bit about smart cars, driverless cars. What's your number one priority?
Well, the connection to the globalization is the fact that the world's working on CO2. This is why I'm so proud to be part of this conference. And Ford's advantage in the future is that it's got in its hands a technology that's transformative. There's actually three of them. The first is the nature of propulsion, which is moving from gas to electric. Might surprise the audience to know that less than 5% of the market right now is electric, but it's estimated to be 30%. The second technology has to do with the robotics. You've heard about AI. The vehicle's so smart that it can drive itself in the future. And the third, which isn't as public, is the notion of a cloud-based system over the vehicles. So the confluence of the three of these things, Francine, mean that we can design transportation systems now differently, and a system that enables or empowers a better CO2 outcome.
these are cars for the future. How much is trade and tensions a distraction when we talk about the end of multilateralism?
Yeah, so in Ford's specific case, it produces most of its vehicles in North America, for example, in country. So the metals tariffs were very negative to us. Most of the supply was coming from American suppliers, so it was over $1 billion consequence. We export, our Lincoln brand in China is very successful. We now had to think about, of course, a 25% tariff for that. It makes it very difficult. But I'm optimistic that there's an equilibrium in the course of this back and forth that, of course, we can be really successful in.
Who will own and develop the cars of tomorrow? Is it car companies? Is it renewable companies? Or is it actually tech companies?
Well, I think that it's a series of players that have to work together. In fact, the irony today is they do, in the analog world, let's call the analog world before the cars were really intelligent, the fueling system and your engine have a really close relationship. The chemistry of the fuel and the way the engines operate are highly choreographed. In the future, the utilities are going to be building renewables to, power electric vehicles. But this cloud-based structure, I want to emphasize it again, is something that hasn't been here. And what it allows us to do is the vehicle in the city can now have a connection. I mean, in a discussion yesterday with Prime Minister Trudeau, he said, I get it. We're sitting at a traffic light late in the evening when there's nobody at the intersection. Why does the red light stay on? In the future, the vehicle will be mediated through intersections like that with this smart system.
But how big is the scale of that? Will it be in all big metropolises? Yeah. Can it go beyond that?
Yeah, so if you're an investor looking at this, it's over $11 trillion. It's why the tech companies are so interested in our business, because it's a systems play of the smart technology of the vehicle and the environment coming together. And basically, as you're building infrastructure now in the future in your countries, you'd be wise not to cut and paste the old system. But it's not rocket science per se. I mean, it's talking about building bandwidth so the vehicles can communicate. 5G is really important. It's about making smart intersections so that the navigation of the vehicles are safe. And then I think a third idea early is parking. If we can have the vehicle communicate with parking spaces. Francine, you lose more fuel efficiency trying to find a parking place than you do being stuck in traffic. So, and it's because they can't be married together. We can do that with this system in the future.
I mean, this is a system that, of course, is extremely important, but how much time do you spend thinking about that compared to new models, old models, how you crack into China, the kind of the day-to-day running of the company?
Yeah, well, that is the challenge. It's why I took the job, is that you have to think about the business in two states at the same time. All the profit, all the talent, we're in the existing business, and we're really committed to that. Like, we make the #1 vehicle in the world, is the F-150 pickup truck. We sold close to 900,000 of them. And that business is relatively healthy by model line. Some markets aren't, so we're trying to fix that. The other state of the business is the one we're describing, where there's no profit yet. The technology's new, the design of the system's emerging, but it's where all the future will be. So a CEO's job is you have to straddle these two things, and you can't really let one go for the other.
You were saying you've been 16 months in the job. Is it a disadvantage or an advantage to come from a non-car making company?
I get that question often, and the way I think about it is what's common about my history in the last job I have is it's industrial, it's global, we sell through a distribution network. In fact, they were highly controlled by family interests. I had that then, I have that now. But I'm able to look at the car business as a combination of vehicles and technology, which is what's defining it in the future versus just thinking about it as a pure vehicle. In fact, think of it this way. The cars have a number of computers and software in them today, but the way they are in the future, they're really rolling computers. And so you have to think of the business differently because of that.
Will I have a driverless electric car by 2030 or sooner?
Oh, for certain. In fact, Ford's committed by 2021 to be in market. But this is a marathon. These vehicles will be super smart, and they learn. So you got to think about the way they learn is by being driven. And so when they hit the market, they'll be safe. They probably will have narrow assignments in terms of what they can do. But over time, they'll expand. And the great thing, as we're sitting here in the conference and you hear others talk about serving the world, this is going to allow us to do things because the vehicle is intelligent, like getting goods to people that couldn't get it, helping people have jobs because they don't have transportation today. Or my mother, God bless her, you know, she had trouble getting to the doctors at the end of her life, someone to take her there. This kind of assistance will be available with that technology.
I mean, the industry is going through as huge transformational changes. Are we going to see consolidation? Do we need so many car makers?
Well, the 08 era, if you were following it, the industry essentially was bankrupt. Ford didn't take any kind of handout, very resilient. We had a wonderful CEO that helped restore the vitality of the company in that time. But as I observe it now, there's too much capacity maybe in the wrong places. And that's why the trade question is so important, is the footprint for production was more malleable before these trade structures. Now we're going to have to deal with lanes that we can only distribute in.
But will we have to deal with trade tensions for the next 20 years?
Well, I don't think that's good for us. I mean, in fact, I would not
But you think it will last 20 years?
Well, trade will always be here, but if you're asking the question, will we be out of equilibrium? No. I think there's going to be news about NAFTA being closed soon. Europe and North America have made tremendous progress as it relates to vehicle discussions. And now we have to deal with China.
Mr. Jim Hackett, thank you so much for joining us. That was, of course, the President and Chief Executive of Ford. Now, next, we have a very exciting conversation about technology as a driver for global growth. But first, let's watch this video to frame our discussion. Take a look.
Thank you.
Technology has always helped humanity flourish. As we move into the future and all its potential, how do we ensure technology continues to help all of humanity flourish together?
In the future, I see a huge need for human skills. Care, support, compassion, the very things that make us human.
We're living in an incredible transformative time with AI.
Robots.
Dexterous robotics.
Robotics. Agricultural technology.
The ability to construct whole genomes.
Decision-making technologies.
One word, miracles.
This is way bigger than the Industrial Revolution, but we can't see it.
Most people have two simultaneous reactions. One is, the wonder, it's so great. And the other is, oh my God, it's going to take all our jobs away. Technology creates new possibilities for increased welfare, but it does not guarantee that we will realize those good outcomes.
But we know developing countries, they have a lot of young workers. If they do not have the opportunity or ability to acquire the technology, they will become poorer.
Right now, only the most highly educated people know how to design and create with these technologies. We really need to think about how we can close that gap to empower a much broader group of people to be able to create with it in areas that matter to them.
Technology can help us change their lives. Unbanked populations are now able to do financial transactions.
Operations can be robotically performed long distance.
Autonomous transportation has the potential to reduce pollution and a lot of vehicle fatalities.
Technology supports the human values of the society we aspire to have.
And we begin to do things that machines can't do, like invent things, culture, music, spiritual, creative parts of humans that are really hard to automate.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Commissioner for Competition, European Commission, Her Excellency Margrethe Vestager, and Editor-in-Chief, Bloomberg LP, John Micklethwaite.
Hello. Thank you very much. We just had the video, which I think sets the scene both for this session and the one after. A big picture view of technology, but I suspect our job is to get down to the nitty-gritty. So we have you in front of us, possibly the most frightening woman to big tech, and the EU Commissioner. You find Google, you've chased Ireland over Apple's tax bill. Now you've announced an early-stage probe into Amazon. And I wondered what the aim of that was. I know you're keen to stress that you want to encourage investment, but what exactly are you looking at on Amazon?
Well, Amazon is it's a two-sided market. They have dual functions. They both host the little guy, so he can enter into e-commerce. They provide a number of services, which allows also smaller businesses to be active e-commerce and to grab the opportunities, and that's great. They're also a big guy themselves. Bookstore, everything. Groceries, movies, the works. And they, of course, get all the data from the little guy, and we want to understand how this data is being used. Because this is all about competition. Because when we say innovation, well, competition is the most important driver for innovation, for you to stay ahead of your competitor.
And do you think the future is a bit like telecoms companies, or maybe what happened with Microsoft many years ago, where you have a platform company which is then forced to let other people trade and have access to that platform?
Well, I think that's very difficult to say, because as it was just said in the video, this is a revolution. Things change, and we haven't even seen what is coming with quantum computing, blockchain, sort of really pulling off. So we probably have a platform economy that's much more diverse than what we have seen, which is why, of course, it's important for us to understand, well, what is the new big? How are companies that benefit from networks effects, from huge amounts of data, from marginal costs approaching zero, how do they compete? And for us, that, of course, is the important thing.
Do you think, in some ways, competition law has been left behind by big tech? You have these companies where you talked about network effects. It is very difficult to intervene until after they have created these, I suppose, near monopolies, as some people would see them.
Well, I think our principles are fine, because they are about human nature. And we don't change, unfortunately. With all our good sides and bad sides, I think we remain the same. But of course, in the regulation, we need to stay alert. Because you can be big. In Europe, you can be successful. But you shouldn't misuse your power. This is actually the story of the two Google finds. Very successful, very welcome in Europe. But we find that they misuse their power for competitors not to be as innovative as they ought to, for consumers not to be able to enjoy the benefits of choice, innovation, affordable prices. And that, of course, is where we have to be very, very vigilant.
But isn't the Google thing an example of what I just said? It took you 7 years. In tech, 7 years is a lifetime.
Yes, part of that is part of the game, because there is an asymmetry in every kind of law enforcement. Because in another example, it takes 5 minutes to break into your home. It will take the police and the court system quite some time to find the guilty person, to get him or her convicted and put away.
Hopefully not 7 years.
No, but you still have responsibility to due process. Because we live in a union based on the rule of law, and we will never, ever compromise on your right to defend yourself. That being said, of course, we can use algorithms too. We can use all the tools of a digital world in order for us to be more speedy.
And do you think tech firms have simply become too big in some cases?
No, I don't think as such that you can make that conclusion, but I think they can be much more transparent. My colleagues have made, I think, very, very good proposals to ensure transparency in the relationship between the smaller business and the platform. And that, I think, is very much needed. The transparency, the willingness actually to deal with people, and to be much more sort of clear that they respect your privacy, your ownership of your own data, so that we as citizens feel that we can build trust with technology.
And do you think privacy is an area where the EU could take a lead?
Well, I think the rights that are now much more clear, that you own your data, that you have a right to be forgotten, that you have a right to know what is out there with you, that you have portability so you can move your data. I think in not only having the rules, but also implementing the rules. Of course, this is something that's important for us as Europeans. And we do hope that we can inspire around the world, because I think that respect of the citizen is what builds trust.
But you know what some people in this audience will think, especially Americans. They will think, look, Europe doesn't have any big tech companies, or certainly not on the scale that America does, and now China, as we will shortly see. And this is Europe just trying to pull back America. Do you think what is your answer to that suspicion?
Well, I think the reason why business are in Europe is because they do very good business. And you see a number of the US companies, they are dominant in the European markets, and they're more than welcome to be that. And when you look at our tax probes, because you're more than welcome as a European member states within or outside of the Union to set your own level of corporate taxation. But you're not supposed to hand out specific favors. That be to Apple or to Starbucks or to some of the European companies where we've seen that happen as well. It's not about your flag. It's not about whether you're privately or publicly owned. It's about your competitive spirit. You're supposed to compete for your business in Europe.
And when you look at these new cases you're taking on, do you look back to old cases like IBM many years ago or Microsoft and try and see those as sort of, I suppose, inspiration for this? Are there lessons you can learn from past periods of antitrust?
I think there's an important lesson about speed, as you just said. Because if things take forever, then it's not the antitrust enforcement that sort of makes sure that what we do as authorities leaves sufficient room for all the many businesses who compete by the book, who do their best with skilled employees trying to make it in the marketplace. They should know, of course, that justice is sufficiently fast for them to enjoy a competitive marketplace.
Do you think there's something different about technology with government, though? You look at other industries and government can leave them alone. In these sort of industries, there is a tendency, as you said, because of network effects, towards having monopolies, towards having that form of effect. And so, in some ways, government needs to rethink.
I think in order to be able to do that, we have to work with the fact that everything digitalizes. Agriculture, health, administration, everything digitalizes. So if you want to accommodate and make a good business environment for that, of course you have to be able to understand it. And this is why the partnership with business in order how to get that right. That's important for us. That's important for governments.
One very quick last question, purely because you mentioned it earlier and Theresa May did it. She talked about Britain now having the lowest corporation tax. Do you think that is a good way to negotiate with the European Union?
Well, it doesn't change much, because also within the Union, in the very basic treaties, as a member state, you have the right to set your level of corporate taxation. That you can do within the Union or outside of the Union. What we don't want within the Union is that member states puts money in one business pocket, not allowing anyone else to have the same thing, because that's not fair competition. But on the level of corporate taxation, you can compete within and without the European Union.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. It's
Welcome.
now my job to introduce, we have Robin Li, the co-founder of Baidu, China's biggest search engine, amongst many other things, being interrogated by Christine Lagarde, who I see as a competitor, but also heads the IMF.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much, and good morning to all of you. I'll start with numbers, the IMF always does, and you'll have to guess what it is before the end of this sequence. 4-3, and this is not about football. Try to guess. Robin, I have the privilege to ask the first question. Margaret was just saying that everything will be digitalized. Mm-hmm. You are the champion of search engines, have been for 18 years, leading Baidu as a co-founder, and you've invested massively in artificial intelligence. Yeah. You have more than 40,000 employees around the world in various places, of which 15,000 computer scientists.
Right.
Can you describe for us what the world will be with artificial intelligence playing a key role?
Yeah, it's going to be huge, the impact of artificial intelligence on the society. I think we are lucky when Baidu started about 18 years ago. We just entered, the world just entered the age of the internet. So at that time, China had less than 10 million internet users. Today,
how many? 10 million.
Yeah, that's the beginning of 2000. And today we have more than 800 million. So we enjoyed a tremendous ride of the internet age. But I would say if the internet is the appetizer, then AI is the main course. The impact of AI will be much larger than the internet. So over the past couple of decades, every one of us experienced the change of the society because of the internet, but we will experience much larger change over the next few decades because of AI. Especially as the technology advances, so computers can now understand humans better, from voice recognition, from computer vision, from natural language understanding, and from a lot of data generated by the users and the internet companies. So we will see a lot of changes. The internet changed a lot of our daily life, but did not have much impact on the to-be industries, so to speak. And I think AI will change that too. AI will change both the to-C businesses, like our everyday life, but it will also change manufacturing, energy, education, healthcare, lots of things from industry to industry. There are lots of things we probably cannot imagine today that will be changed by AI.
When you talk to your 15,000 scientists at the moment, in which area do you ask them to focus?
It's pretty much all AI, but AI is a huge area, right? I mentioned the speech recognition, computer vision, natural language understanding. These are the fundamental technologies of AI, and you have all kinds of applications in areas like autonomous driving, smart speakers at home. Even search itself, I think, is an AI problem. If you think about it, you type in a query in human language, and the computers try to guess what you mean and then come up with results. So it's fundamentally using computer to understand human. So it's an AI problem.
I don't know if you've read that book, 21 Lessons for the 21st Century, by Yuval Noah Harari.
Yeah, I heard about it.
He says that artificial intelligence is one thing, but it's not enough. It has to be coupled with biotech innovations. Do you agree with that?
Well, in the future, maybe, but over the past, it was not the case. A lot of people trying to figure out how the human brain works, then try to mimic that using computers. That's not how AI works today. AI basically is still using the strengths of computers to try to mimic human, not using the biological structure to understand human. Yeah. But so I would like to ask you on the impact of technology. We all know that technology has a lot of impact on society, on the markets. But how about the financial system? Since you took office about 7 years ago, has the world's financial system changed due to technology? And is there any impact to you and to IMF?
Well, I'll give you a very, very basic example. At the International Monetary Fund, 7 years ago when I started as managing director, the word fintech was not in current use in the institution. Now, we have a lot of economists and financial experts actually working on fintech and trying to identify what are the benefits and the threats as a result of fintech. You know, you can think of the use of
So just
mobile
threats, not opportunities?
Well, it's both. No, it has. Let me say a word about opportunities. When you talk about mobile banking, you look at countries like Peru, like Kenya, like the Zambia, like many other sub-Saharan African countries where people, and women in particular, did not have access to financing, did not have the ability to transact, and were at threat of being robbed, of being abused. And mobile banking, coupled with other financial technology innovations, helped them, gave up the ability to be empowered, to be economic players. That's just one aspect in developing societies of fintech. On the other hand, you have the development of some interesting cryptocurrencies at the margin of the financial system, where clearly supervision regulations have to play a role in order to maintain stability and to keep at bay the dark transactions that happen and that are transacted using some of those cryptocurrencies. So it has huge benefits, but it has its risks as well. So technologies generally outside the financial sectors are expected to improve productivity, which is something that all societies, policymakers are in search of in order to improve the living standards and the income of people. But it's associated with threats. And I was going to ask you that, actually.
Yeah.
There are lots of numbers floating around. How many millions of jobs will be under threats, will be disappearing as a result of artificial intelligence. There are other numbers which are saying, no, it's actually a net plus.
Yeah.
And there will be many more jobs created than jobs destroyed as a result. Yeah. I'll tell you about a finding from the IMF once you've addressed that question. So,
all right,
over to you.
Yeah, I'm an entrepreneur. I'm always optimistic. But when I look at the changes, I always think about how can we make things better because of this change. And I agree with you that a lot of jobs could be replaced by machine in the future, but a lot more jobs will be created by technology advancement, especially
So you think it's
AI.
a net positive?
I think so, although at this time, it's hard for me or for anyone to imagine what exact opportunities, new job opportunities will be created. But I can give you a few examples that I can think of. First is the so-called labeling problem. In AI, when we try to train the computers to learn to behave like a human, computers need a lot of data, a lot of the so-called labeled data, meaning that you need to have the question and answer pairs, and it's usually done by human.
It's the tagging of data that we sometimes struggle with.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
You need a lot of that data in order for the computers to learn. That will create a lot of jobs for people who are in the labeling industry. And as the computer gets smarter and smarter, we will probably need a lot more labeling. This is not like replacing human jobs, but enhancing humans' capabilities. In healthcare, there's a term called CDSS. I think it's a clinical decision support system. It's not trying to replace doctors. It's trying to help the doctors to make better decisions, right? These are the examples that AI is helping the mankind, but not replacing human labors. And you all, as the efficiency or productivity continue to improve, I think people don't need to work long hours like we are today. Then they have more time to enjoy, to consume more content. And content...
That's assuming they have an income.
Yeah. They will make more with less working hours, but content are generally created by humans. They are very... it requires a lot of creativity, and computers are not good at that yet. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Let me tell you about the study that we're just about to release, actually, which deals with the impact of those new technologies, and we don't distinguish between AI versus biotech versus robotization.
Right.
But essentially, the finding is that, and we extrapolated from 30 OECD countries to the rest of the world,
right.
And the conclusion was that quite a lot of jobs will be significantly, materially affected.
Yeah.
When we look at those 30 countries, it will be about 26 million jobs that will actually probably disappear. The second findings, which I thought was interesting, is that because it applies essentially to those tasks that are repetitive, and because there are more women doing those jobs, women are likely to be more affected than men by the impact of artificial intelligence on the labor market. Do you think that's true?
It could be true, but like I said, that's just one side of the coin. There's another side that labeling is. You can also say it's kind of repetitive. You need
but you need to apply judgment.
Yeah, relatively simple judgment. It's not that hard. For example, if you try to teach the computer to drive, it's not that hard. Most people, when they grow up, they can learn how to drive. But it's actually very, very hard for computers to learn how to drive. Although, companies like Baidu and quite a few other companies and Ford too are working on autonomous driving, and we are quite a few years away from truly, self-driving. It's still, I would say, highly autonomous vehicles, not really completely, free from drivers. So we will use computer to enhance the human activities.
You don't want to replace us.
Right. No. There's.
Okay. Am I allowed one more question? I'm expected to really speed. I want to ask you one. Because you have 40,000 employees around the world, many of whom are in China. Are you enjoying a regime, an environment, a framework that enables you to research, develop anything you want?
Pretty much, yes. I think...
Too much.
Yeah. We have lots of engineers, and China is a big market. There are lots of people, and we have like hundreds of millions of users use our services every day, and a lot of data is generated. We can use data to learn how to improve our services. So we do have a lot of opportunities to innovate. But that being said, there are constraints like how do you protect privacy, and how do you make sure that the technology does not go out of control, that's do bad things to the mankind. There are things that we need to worry about, but I do see more opportunities than threats.
Okay. All right, the use of control is nonetheless part of your environment.
Yeah.
Now, I'm going to turn, I'm just assuming that I should stop now. I can't see much signs, but so 4 to 3, has anybody found out? So this morning, so far, you've heard 4 really top women and 3 top men. Big change underway. Thank you.
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome President of the Republic of Colombia, His Excellency Ivan Duque Marques, President of the Republic of South Africa, His Excellency Cyril Ramaphosa, Prime Minister of the Kingdom of Norway, Her Excellency Erna Solberg, and our moderator, 42nd President of the United States, the Honorable William J. Clinton.
Thank you very much. I want to first, I guess I should apologize to Christine Lagarde, because her last comment was you'd had 3 great women and 1 great man, and here I am trying to balance the scales in a politically incorrect way. Thank you all for being here. I'd like to begin by thanking Mike Bloomberg for hosting this second Global Forum, for the work that I had the privilege of doing with him in the C40s on climate change. And as an American, I thank him for standing up for sensible gun safety laws in our country and trying to bring our crime rate down to manageable levels and save lives. This is an interesting panel for several reasons, but I'd like to set it up the way I see it. Last year, Mayor Bloomberg asked me to give a speech, and I gave a very brief speech and said, it may be unfashionable, but I still believe we live in an interdependent world with common challenges, and that cooperation is better than conflict, that we have to find a way to get more win-win solutions, and that I believed in things like more trade, then have arguments about what's fair, but don't walk away from the international economy. I believed we had an obligation to help each other with our social challenges and our difficulties of being proud of our respective identities and managing our diversity. And I thought we would either achieve, over the long run, inclusive prosperity or none at all, inclusive social solidarity or none at all. I still believe that. So maybe I'm old-fashioned, but I want to betray my deep prejudice in favor of that position. On the other hand, though it was now nearly 20 years ago, I can still remember what it was like to be an elected politician. And there's a big difference in having to deal with the fears, the conflicts, the emergencies of the moment, and, you know, floating above it all and being high-minded. We need both. But these three remarkably accomplished people have dealt with a set of unique challenges that deserve our respect and our attention. So even though we could spend the rest of the time we have repeating bromides about things we all believe, I think it's far more important that you hear from each of them from the root of their own experience. And so I'm going to start with President Ramaphosa. I've known him a long time. He was elected to take South Africa in a new direction. They recently got a bad report. They lead the world in income inequality. Mm-hmm. The report didn't point out that from the time Nelson Mandela became president until 2011, they were reducing inequality. Poverty was going down. Progress was being made. He was elected as much as anything else to root out corruption in South Africa. It's a problem nearly everywhere to a greater or lesser degree, but too much of it can wreck democracy and in the end can even wreck a non-democratic system. But he got elected to make good things happen. So here's what a lot of potential investors are thinking about. Okay, I like this guy, Ramaphosa. He says he's going to get rid of corruption. And he made a lot of money in business. He understands the economy. But he's promised to go back to land reform, the original animating purpose of his party decades ago, when Mandela was thrown in prison and all the others suffered as they did in ways they did. So he's got an interesting take on this, so I want to start with him. Okay, we all live in an interdependent world. We want to work together. We believe creative cooperation is better. You have to figure out what that means in terms of how you're going to get the economy going, how are you going to reduce inequality, how are you going to redeem the promise of land reform without screwing up the investment climate and making people trust you.
Well, thank you very much, President Clinton, and let me start off by thanking you for being supportive for good causes around the world and also being very supportive for what we're doing in South Africa and for the wonderful relationship that you had with Nelson Mandela. You and him struck a very wonderful friendship and relationship, and we're eternally grateful for the support that you continue to give him. We face a number of challenges in South Africa. We're having to deal with the legacy of apartheid, and legacy that was solidified over hundreds of years. And correctly so, as you said, when my party was formed in 1912, it was really to undo what was set in place by the colonialists and by the apartheid system. And one of the key issues around which the ANC was formed was to redress the imbalances of the past, but also to deal with the land question. Land had been taken away from the majority of our people. In 1913, just a year after the ANC was formed, the land architecture was changed and delineated in a way where 87% of the land was given to just less than 8% of the population and 13% to the rest of the population. And that continued to be a wound and a sore in the hearts and minds of South Africans, because they took a view that here was an important economic resource that they had been locked out of, that they were not allowed to own, to control, or to participate in a meaningful way. So over the 106 years, this has been a festering sore. And the party that I lead felt that we had now reached a point where we needed to address it. And it came up with a resolution in conference that we should now move ahead with land reform. And in doing so, we should do it in a way where, as we expropriate land and make sure that it is available to the majority of the population, we should ensure that it does not harm the economy, it advances agricultural production, and also ensures food security. Now, what this has yielded is a wonderful, all-encompassing debate in South Africa. The majority of South Africans are involved in a debate and a discussion which is leading to collaboration. Many landowners are coming forward with solutions. We've had 650,000 proposals put forward to our parliament on how to resolve this. A number of those who own land are saying they want to be part of the solution rather than be part of the problem. A number of companies that own land are saying, we don't really have business in owning land. We want to give it away. We want it to be in the hands of the people. And other landowners are saying we want 50-50 joint ventures. And so wonderful solutions are coming to the fore. And they are all aimed at ensuring that we get a solution that will lead to cohesion, social cohesion in South Africa, economic growth that will enable our economy to grow when all the people of South Africa are now utilizing the important resource that we have, land, in the best way possible. Now, with that, we think South Africans themselves will come up with solutions like they did when we resolved the apartheid problem. Apartheid was once seen as the most intractable problem in the world that could not be solved. But under the leadership and guidance of Nelson Mandela, we were able to resolve it. And similarly, now, his spirit, his values, and his principles, and his vision is guiding us. We're not going to have land grabs. That is never going to be allowed. We're going to make sure that as we embark on land reform, it becomes all-inclusive, leads to nation building, social cohesion, economic development, which will benefit all the people of South Africa. The construct of apartheid was exclusion. Construct of a new democratic government is inclusion, that everybody should be included and benefit from the economic process that we are engendering. As we deal with corruption, as we gender economic growth through investment. This is the trajectory that we have embarked on as South Africa. And we are very grateful that many people around the world are aware of the challenge we face and are seeking to assist us. So we're eternally grateful for all the support we can get in this.
We'll come back to that. I was going to go this way, but I just got a note telling me that President Duque is going to miss his slot to speak at the UN. So you're up. Here's what I want to say. First of all, this man took office when he was 4 years younger than I was. So I really resent him. Actually, I've been very impressed with the way you've handled this. But brief background for those of you who don't know a lot about Colombia. In 2000, 1/3 of Colombia, 1/3 of the whole country was in the hands of the narco-traffickers and the gangs that supported them, which included groups that had once been head of political dissidents like FARC and EL and others. We started Plan Colombia. We gave them money to build up their law enforcement, build up their judicial system, support alternative economic paths, mostly for Colombia, to some extent for their Andean neighbors. President Pastrana was ending his term. President Uribe came in. Then President Santos came in. Within a few years, Colombia belonged to Colombians again. There was a 2/3 reduction in coca planting. The peace process proceeded. Part of the peace process called for a relaxation of the prosecution of in effect, the changes. And guess what? The coca production rose again to record levels. He was elected in a difficult environment with a large margin because he offered the promise of a future that was more drug-free, more gang-free, more violence-free, but still more peaceful and inclusive. He's up there walking a tightrope in a magnificent country that is the second oldest democracy in all the Americas, full of unbelievable resources. So, before you go to the UN, tell them what you want them to know about Colombia and how it's one thing to say you're for peace and inclusion and quite another thing to achieve it when there's an unlimited amount of money coming from narco-trafficking to do everything possible to undermine the future you want to build.
Well, thank you, President Clinton, for your kind words. And I must also thank you because when you were President of the United States, you began Plan Colombia. And you did it because you knew that the best way that Colombia could develop was bringing down illegal crops and opening development opportunities. So when Plan Colombia began in 1999 until 2012, we not only reduced illegal crops from 180,000 hectares to 50,000 hectares, but the government and the business climate changed for the positive good of the whole nation. And we became a country that was well recognized worldwide for those achievements, and we brought investment and we expanded the middle class. Now, there was a peace process with FARC in the last years, and it's positive. But what we don't want to suffer in Colombia is a major setback. And what we have seen in the last 5 years is that illegal crops are now higher than the times when you signed Plan Colombia, and we don't want that to continue. So I have said that everybody who's involved in the peace process that is truly going to a reconciliation process, we are going to help them. We want them to succeed. We want the investment to go to the places that violence was present so we can make a change. But we also have to be very clear that lasting peace can only be built with law and order. So if there are people who are going back to criminality, we're going to bring them to justice. It's the only way. But we have also to call for international attention that in order to make that substitution of illegal crops viable and sustainable, We need to have legal crops that have accessibility to the markets we have opened, to the US, to Europe, to Africa, to different places in the world. And that's something that we have to do, and we're doing it right now. Bringing back law and order, but at the same time, creating fair trade, sustainable trade, so that we can have a sustainable substitution of illegal crops. And I built my agenda for Colombia based on 3 pillars: law and order, legality; entrepreneurship, because we want to be a country that is always more business friendly, that is open for small, medium-sized enterprise to keep on growing and innovating. And the third thing is that if we have legality and entrepreneurship, the consequence is equality. And that means closing the gaps, gender gaps, income gaps. And I feel very proud to be the first Colombian president to have a parity, equalitarian cabinet, men and women, 50% men, 50% women. And I also feel very proud that we are mobilizing investment to technology, to agricultural development. And my goal is that by the end of our term, we'll be very close to putting an end to extreme poverty. So those are the challenges we face. I know they're hard, but I know we're going to achieve it if we get the Colombian people to unite in that common purpose, Mr. President.
I do want to say, and I think you would agree with this, it's still less violent than it was.
Yes, of course.
And so the trick is, what happened was they had a peace agreement in which they agreed to basically lay off the rural areas a little bit, and what you said happened. This is one of the things, all of you have a challenge. Just think about this. If you have a commodity that can generate the kind of money that the cocoa can, then he has to have sufficient law enforcement in the rural areas, as well as make political deals, because people go where the money is. And we, all over the world, we are having trouble finding ways for rural people to make a decent living in a legal way. So we wish you well. I know you have to go to the UN. But
yeah, sorry that I'm going to miss the rest of the panel, but I have to go and deliver my speech.
Thank you. Go.
Prime Minister.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. President.
And we had an international coffee conference there last year. We had people growing coffee from all over the world come to Colombia because they have the capacity to grow more, as does Africa. Prime Minister Stolberg, you would seem at first blush, say, why is she on this panel? Do they have any problems in Norway? I want those problems. I want to be Norway when I grow up, right? Oil revenues, environmental responsibility, burying carbon dioxide back under the North Sea, a huge sovereign wealth fund, and massive development aid, the first country in the world to meet the UN target of giving 0.7% of its GDP in development aid, and a broad consensus across political parties that this ought to be done. So, what's your take on where we are in the world today? How can we get other people who otherwise think like you to continue to be committed to global trade, global development? And how is your country dealing with the upheaval caused in Europe by the massive influx of refugees, mostly from violence in the Middle East?
Well, start off, I know that we cannot produce a history like South Africa or Colombia, but we are maybe more representative of a lot of European countries that are troubled with new types of challenges. I think globalization has been a win-win situation in the world, both for especially for developing countries, the fact that we have lifted so many people out of poverty. But of course, you have a disparity between what happens for people inside those countries that usually were the part of the global society. Poor people, low income, low education, who now feels themselves threatened. And I think that is the European issue today, to make sure that you have open economy, that you have trade, that you still step forward on globalization, because technology will drive this globalization, whatever politicians are going to say, because the technology now will move that. But how can we as politicians be able to do what we did not well enough the last decade, to make sure that people who feel threatened by the jobs that move out of the country or just are removed by technology, in fact see some type of future? How can we make sure that we have educational system? How do we make sure that we don't just train people when they're 16, 18, and 20, but start to train 40-year-olds? That's usually when I give a speech, I say, I'm 7 years old. I still learn new things. So why shouldn't we be more invested in? 57-year-old women should work much longer in our workforce, and but we have to be invested in for re-education, for training, and to do that. And I think that's to remember that the basis always is to make sure that the people of your country can continue to feel that they measure and they manage their own lives. And I think that's the common challenge. I think if you're a developing country, if you're an industrialized country, everything of that is to make sure that you have that fundamental, that you are focusing on what is the challenge for people to participate and be in control of their own life, to make a livelihood, to make sure that they can have a family. And for example, if you look at Europe, who have had so high youth unemployment for so long, it's going down now. That's one of the big challenges.
I know they want us to wrap up, but you have to answer a question because it affects his future.
Yeah.
Norway has been, as I said, very generous in development aid. They have supported, full disclosure, our foundation's efforts in fighting AIDS, TB, and malaria in Africa, and in promoting climate change initiatives that are economically viable. South Africa has received a lot of that. What do you say in this time of the so-called Brexit mentality about why you did the right thing in supporting investments to help South Africa rise from the largest AIDS burden in the world, now leading the world not only in fighting AIDS, but also tuberculosis, which is now killing more people than AIDS? And they're doing a great job there. So what do you say to people that if they say, why are you doing this? We're all going up in smoke here.
Yes. Well, I'm usually saying that for a country like Norway, and I believe for all other countries, we are a global village. When people are hurt in somewhere else, if they are polluting somewhere else, it will affect us. So we need global solutions, and it's affect a high response in Norway. 70% of our voters say that we should use development aid. They might argue that some of the development aid projects is not good enough, is not effective enough, there's too much bureaucracy or corruption, but they are in favor of a system of giving development aid. And I think the results that we have seen through the investment through Gavi for vaccines, on fighting HIV, where Norway has supported quite a lot, I think the results are so convincing. The reason why we have halved the deaths of children from 2000 to 2015 in the world, the first 5 years, it's because we've done these health investments. And this is a story of why we should work together. And that's also why we, for example, have now created with a couple of other countries what we call CEPI, which is an initiative to make sure that we are working on vaccines before we get the illnesses, before we get the epidemics and pandemics, so we have a preparedness for that, which we think is, it will hit us all. If they start to get ill in South Africa, it will hit Norway. Yeah. It might take a year, it might take 2. If it's really a pandemic, it will come within weeks.
Excellent.
I'll give you the last word. What do you say? If people say, this is a very impressive presentation you made, but we're just not buying it. You just got too much baggage here with all these problems. Why should I invest in South Africa right now? What do you say? Last word.
Well, I would say that what we're seeking to do on the land question is to manage risk, to minimize the risk, but at the same time, we're doing a whole lot of other things. We're working on policy issues to ensure that there's policy certainty and consistency. And this we've arrived at after talking to the business sector, to the unions, and we all agree that if we address this, we will begin to see the investment community looking at South Africa in a different way. We're going to an investment conference in October where we're hoping to raise $100 billion in the next 5 years. And already we've got quite a lot of interest, and I invite everyone here who is a would-be investor to come to South Africa, because we're open for business, we're open for investment, and we're solving a whole lot of problems, from corruption to dysfunctional governance to a whole lot of other issues on the policy side. South Africa is being repositioned and repackaged for good investments. We still have great resources that people should get an interest in. So A, we're ready to go, and B, we're open for business.
And finally, if you want them to do land reform in a way that does not involve expropriation, which he has promised not to do, then they need to be able to make a living in rural areas, which means they need investment from sovereign wealth funds and wealth generally, and they need social progress. These two people, I think, are quite remarkable in very different circumstances, from slightly different politics. They prove that no matter what anybody else tells you, cooperation works better than constant conflict. And winning in politics and economics and society is not a zero-sum game, it's a positive-sum game in the 21st century. If you have an interdependent world, we are going to have inclusive prosperity and inclusive social policies and inclusive politics, or we're going to spend all our time squabbling over who gets a bigger piece of a smaller pie. That's the larger decision that is behind everything they do. And I think we should support them. So let's give them a hand, and thank you very much.
Thank you.
Well, thank you very much to our speakers, all of them, and I hope you've enjoyed the program so far today. But there is a lot more to come, with roundtable discussions and interviews and panels and new initiatives to announce on some of the topics that we've covered this morning. Take a look on the back of your badge and you'll see where we've assigned you. We tried to match interests with the panels and also to spread them around so that everybody has a manageable number. Some of the things that we're talking about, heads of states, CEOs, and public and private banks will discuss ways to increase the access to electricity in the developing world without increasing global carbon emissions. Bloomberg will join the government of the UK in a new effort to measure gender inequality in the private sector, which hopefully can put an end to it. Presidents and CEOs will discuss a new partnership to help countries integrate immigrants and refugees. Ford Motor Company, Uber, and Lyft will join Bloomberg Philanthropies to discuss a new partnership called Shared Streets. It helps rideshare and auto companies share traffic data with cities so they can manage congestion and reduce carbon emissions and prevent traffic crashes and prepare for the arrival of autonomous vehicles. And I think all these are examples of how governments and business can work together to solve problems, and we've heard many of them already this morning. Then this afternoon, we'll be joined by President Macron to open the One Planet Summit and with partners from around the world, and I hope the conversations that begin here continue for a very long time into the future. And I also want to thank you all again for coming. Multilateralism has brought the world unprecedented peace and prosperity, and if we work together and don't try to destroy it, I think the future for all of us will be very bright. So enjoy the rest of your day, and all the best.
Cucumber.
crackers. Graham crackers. Cookies. Lucky. My mom puts cucumbers in her tacos. They're crunchy. Why don't I trade you my cucumbers for your graham crackers? I want a graham cracker. I'm not going to trade down. You have a graham cracker surplus. Fine. You trade me half of your cookies, and I will counter trade half of my graham crackers. I'll directly export the remaining graham crackers for your full cucumber yield. Deal. 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 Trade. Good for me, good for them. Win, win, win.
When we trade goods and services, we also trade ideas. We learn about cultures from all over the world and really realize how beautiful the world is in its diversity.
The trading system is a very valuable component to the world economy.
Trade brings countries together in ways that are often good from the point of view of peace.
Countries that are both intimately intertwined in the same supply chain are going to get richer faster, and they're less likely to go to war.
When developing countries in particular open up to trade, that creates not just abundance, but it creates hope because it's creating opportunities for people to see a path for them to be better off and their children to be better off.
There's no reason that two nations actively trading with each other can't have growing workforces, each specializing in what they're good at.
When we specialize, we can earn higher income. When families have higher income, they can afford to send their children to school. When people are more educated, they can be more productive participants in global economy, and they can also cope better with the hardships of international trade.
When the domestic economy is not performing very well, it's easy and it's tempting to blame other countries for that. If you do so through trade measures, often you'll make the situation worse.
The way to deal with this political backlash is to accept these negative consequences and address them.
The best way to manage the ups and downs of trade is to strengthen your floors, not raise your walls or build ceilings.
Globalization is not something we can hold off or turn off. It is the economic equivalent of a force of nature.
What that does is it gets people thinking about investing in their own futures, investing in their children's futures.
This reduces inequality, it adds to employment, it reduces insecurity.
And it creates this dynamic that I think leads to hope for the future.
Message in a bottle.